right. Welcome back to those of you who are here again, and welcome to those of you who have never listened to our podcast before. So, I'm Jen. I'm the founder of House of Halls, and I have Dr. Winings with us this morning.
Hi,
Um,
everyone.
and you want to give them like the brief, what your background is in, what you
Yeah,
do. That
absolutely. So I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and I work with children and families in a variety of mental health needs.
awesome. Okay. Well, today we've done a few of these that I've had some people send to me on Instagram. I did like a question box, and then I had a friend reach out recently and kind of asked us to cover a topic that I think will be such a broad thing. It actually touches on a previous one. I don't know if you remember one of the ones we've talked about in the past. We had somebody that was asking how to deal with grief from about losing someone they never met. And essentially, their dad walked out when they were super little, like not even 1 year old. So they don't know them,
Mhm,
but they grieve their absence.
mhm.
And I feel like this maybe could be kind of down that road. I'm going to read the story that they sent me, and then we can kind of dig into what this looks like. So, okay. So, let me skip the first part. It's nuances. All right. My dad walked out on my family when I was 12. He basically just fell off the planet only to turn up a few years later with another woman who had a child. I always felt angry and jealous that he was there for all the life events, soccer games, etc., that he missed for my brother and I. He was not a great dad anyway, but the feeling that he was part of another family and we were just left in the dust was very hard.
Mm,
Fast forward to our son. My husband's dad died abruptly from cancer 20 years ago. Our son only knew him in his early years and doesn't have a lot of memories, and I feel guilty that he lost out on that experience of having a grandpa. My grandparents were a huge part of my life. My father has now supposedly found God and is begging for forgiveness, but my guard is so high that I've never let our son meet him. I was wondering if you and Liz could discuss some of this. I've always felt I wasn't good enough as a kid for him to stay with
mm.
us, but now being an adult, I know that was never about my brother and I, and we were just the collateral damage. That's deep.
Thank you so much for being willing to share your experience with us.
Absolutely.
And absolutely, we'll talk about it because not like we're going to talk about you, but because I think absolutely, like, thank you for being vulnerable and inviting us to have a conversation about collateral damage. I love your phrasing because I think so many children are living with grief because they were in circumstances that they did not choose and they have collateral damage. And I think that's the other beautiful mystery of this human experience is we're connected to people. And so sometimes a family system makes a change, like a divorce or a
Mhm.
separation, and they think, "Oh, the kids will be fine." But then maybe there are elements of what you experienced as a child that you didn't really get to fully process until you were an adult, or maybe you didn't realize this impacted you in a specific way. And yes, some kids are completely fine, but sometimes it's not. And your feelings are valid either way. There's no right way to feel. Um, and I just feel a sense of compassion for any child who finds out a parent established a family system and was an active part of someone else's life. It's
Yeah,
not fair,
yeah.
and it's totally sad. So it makes sense to me that someone would feel guarded against that person, that you might not be someone I want to be an active part of my life or my children's lives. I think that's a very
A break in
beautiful
trust,
perspective.
right? Like,
Mhm.
how am I supposed to trust someone who I honestly who kind of, an ultimate act of betrayal, right? You left me when I had no choice. I didn't choose to be born. I didn't choose to be here. You chose to just leave me. I wasn't important enough to you, right? Like that, you left so much unsaid that it said so much. And it's like, how do I trust that you're not still that person, that you wouldn't do it again? Like you did it once, and how do you resolve those years and years and years of that feeling of abandonment?
Mhm.
Let them back in. And it's hard, and I can imagine, you might even feel a sense of guilt because you're like, well, am I taking something away from my son? Am
Mm.
I denying him an experience that I had?
Mhm.
But I think too, like, you know what? It's so hard because I think there are things that are so special in everyone's childhood that we want our kids to experience, whether it's a
Yeah, good
relationship,
point.
a lifestyle, whatever that looks like, right? And we want to give them that because we know how good it was for us.
Mhm.
But something I've had to realize is like, it doesn't mean that that would be even a great memory for my kid, or that like they're going to have relationships and experiences and all these things just in a different way. And so it's, while I can talk about growing up and going to my grandma's or whatever it is that I can relate to, like, you know what? You and I are such a good example. Okay. I did not have a relationship much at all with my mom's mom. She lived up in Wisconsin. I didn't see her often. Her and my mom weren't close, so she's not alive anymore. But I mean, her and I, we were not close. We didn't have a relationship.
Yeah.
I do have a relationship with my dad's mom, but I feel like it's very different than it would have been because my dad died and my parents weren't married anymore. So it's not like the only tie she has is that she's my grandma, me and my older brother, right? But she has no
Mhm.
relation to my mom, my stepdad, any of that. And so there was a stage that even after my dad had died and my mom was teaching dance lessons and it was in the evenings, me and my brother would go to my grandma's and we'd go there, I think, 1 or 2 nights a week after school. And I got to experience those times with her, right? Then there's the experiences that you've had, and I was even blessed enough to have with your grandparents, where
Yeah.
you're like going up to the farm, you're spending weeks there at a time. Like you had such a special, close relationship with your
Mhm.
parents that I've never experienced, right? Like
Mhm.
I've never had that.
Yeah.
Love that for you. It was so fun to be a part of it for like 12
Right.
seconds. And guys, I also crashed a golf cart into a mail. It was the whole experience.
It was a wonderful trip.
It
Sorry
was
about that.
very memorable. Well, you forgot. I've never forgotten. I was mortified.
That's
Liz's
so
face, she
funny.
pulled onto the mail truck. She was sitting backward. It was
Jen
dumb.
is not the best golf cart driver.
Chris would beg, or like, what's the word? Not he would venture to say that I'm just not a good driver in general. I'm like, bro, you let me drive our kids around 24/7, so you shouldn't say things like that. I'm a great driver. Not going.
I've also been in the car with Jen when she got pulled over one time.
Okay, so we'll save the roast for another day. But anyways, all of this to say, I've gotten pulled over several times in my life. Um, where were we? Relationships, right?
Yeah.
But
Just
I
because you had it in childhood doesn't mean it will be the same for your child.
correct. And like I feel like my kids, at least at this stage of their life, they do get to see their grandparents a lot more than I remembered seeing mine at this age. And I even think of Chris's brother. His
Mhm.
daughters lived right by their grandma, and she would, they're a little bit older now, but just picking them up from school, like they're a huge part of their childhood was at their grandparents' house.
Mhm.
Chris had a similar experience, was very close with his grandparents. But to me, like, and he wants that. He's like, oh, like
Mm.
that's something that was so special to him that he's
Yeah,
like, well, our kids don't like get that. And, I kind of hate that for them. And I'm like, well, I didn't have that and I turned out okay, and I still have so many special childhood
yeah,
things, and, so it's like, as much as it's hard for us to think outside of what we know and what was
right.
special to us, but our kids just aren't going to have the same life. They're not gonna have the same experiences, and that is okay.
Mhm.
And I don't think we should feel a sense of guilt because it's out of your control. And you know what? If anything, I'm gonna venture to say maybe you should feel proud that you're protecting him from potentially feeling abandoned.
Mhm.
You felt abandoned, like, and do you think the option of maybe giving him that relationship with his grandfather, is it worth the potential that he will also feel a loss by it? I don't
Yeah.
know.
So there's a couple of things that you made me think. The first is we've talked about a theme in many of our podcasts where you get to choose how to make meaning of an event in your life. So
Mhm.
you get to choose as the adult. And so I think that applies here.
Okay.
And we can maybe unpack that in a second. The other thing is I learned this from a mentor, and it is something I'm very grateful for because I think we can feel the pressures of family systems and not have insight into, is this okay? Is this right? Is this what I actually want? Or is this an external pressure expectation because it's how it's always been done or because we need to have this relationship? When in actuality, we haven't analyzed truly, is this what's good and right for my child? And what my
Yes.
mentor taught me is that an adult does not deserve access to a child without a relationship with the parent. So there should be no sense of, I deserve a relationship with this child if you don't have a relationship with the parent. And what I
Mhm.
mean by that is the parent is who is supposed to be filtering things for a child at a developmentally appropriate age and introducing things to them throughout their life. So if you, as the adult, don't have a working relationship with, in this circumstance, your biological dad or anyone,
Mhm.
that's kind of where we start. So it would actually be indirect to say, should my child have a relationship with his grandfather because I don't want him to miss out on that. Well, I actually think we kind of have to reroute that and say, am I willing to have interactions with that person? I'm not saying intimate,
Yeah, yeah.
like to gauge whether or not this would be a safe person for my child, or is that person going to respect kind of our family system and how we interact with our kid? And
Mhm.
there's going to be nuances to that for every family system, but I'm just sharing that to say it's kind of unfortunate that there are so many of us who are bombarded by this sense of entitlement and expectation to relationships with our children, but we may not feel at peace in the relationship with that adult. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a great point and a good way to kind of filter the yes and no because I think that's
Yeah.
what's hard here is experiencing the grief and the loss and the abandonment and all of those things while also trying to make sense of it for your child who you feel like it's not fair is almost like the collateral damage, of
Mhm.
but I think we can reframe it to like, are they really collateral damage? Or you know what? Did you going through that save them from some heartache?
Mm, for
Because
sure.
they did. And you know what? If you don't know that person intimately, or maybe not intimately, but like even well enough to know what that relationship would look like with your child, like that might not be a relationship. That might be a relationship you regret introducing. It
Mhm.
might be like, wow, I don't know you. I don't know what world you're going to open my child into. I don't know, even though her child is a little bit older, but I still think the influence that that relationship could have on them is
Mhm.
if you don't know that person, it makes perfect sense. It's like, well, then I don't really trust you to be an influence on my child's life because I don't know
Mhm.
what your influence will look like because I don't know you.
Right.
So,
Yeah. And I think as a parent with anything, finding the language that you can that's developmentally appropriate. So if a child is saying, "Well, why don't I get to do certain things?"
mhm,
How do you want to communicate that with them? Because one of the things you said earlier was, it made me think of like an omission. So like the things that don't happen,
mhm,
we're still responsible for that as adults. And I'm not saying like the normal forgetfulness of life or oops, we might have not done something. But
mhm,
like if we're intentionally excluding a relationship, we will be accountable for that to our children someday. And
yeah,
so finding the language that feels appropriate, it's
mhm,
not that we have to ask our children's permission for it because they're not going to have all the detail or ability to really make that as an informed, decision.
yeah,
So just being thoughtful at the right age and stage. Maybe you invite them to be a part of a relationship with you and that person.
mhm,
But if it's not clear, don't rush it because you need to feel at peace with the decisions you make for your family before you welcome a child into a circumstance
yeah,
because you don't want to just keep reciprocating collateral damage throughout different generations because of family system or
right.
pressure from other people.
Yeah. And I think some other things that can really come into play there is like, does the child know the situation? Do they know your dad left? Do they know the whole story? Do they want to meet them? I think there's just so many, and of course, all has to be age appropriate, right?
Yes.
But I think there's a lot to that too. And it's it could go good or bad, right? Like how you feel about them may be
Right.
completely different, because while your child didn't have that relationship growing up, it's not to say, like, their relationship with their grandpa might just be totally different because they don't have the background that you have.
Yeah.
So if it's something that you are wanting to pursue, it might not be as negative of an
Right.
experience as you felt.
Yeah. And I think that's where, like, if you as the adult I'm gesturing like side to side because if you as the adults can build a cordial relationship where
Mhm,
you're okay with that person meeting your child,
mhm,
we don't know how it will go. But you have to feel at peace with that decision to include or not,
mhm.
and then how you wanna communicate with your child at the right age, you know, what the decision was or how that came to be, that it wasn't thoughtless. And I think that's
Mhm,
sometimes how we might feel as adults when we're looking back on our life and we're thinking, well, why did the adults do that? Why did my dad not communicate? To me, there's an element of you may have a lot of unanswered questions that you may never get the answers to. And so that can be challenging. Like if we're expecting to have full resolution before we grant access, I don't know that that's realistic. And so maybe that's coming up with what do you need to have an answer for yourself? Like, is
mhm.
this the relationship I want my child to be exposed to?
Yeah.
And the other thing I would say is that we shouldn't always assume lack of relationship means lack of quality of life,
Yes. Yes.
right?
Yes.
Like a child can have a very full life and it not necessarily be with every single person in their biological family.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like that for me compares I have so many friends. Like I'm very close with my cousins now, but I didn't get to grow up with them because they live
Mm,
in a different state.
yeah,
And now that we're adults and we have cell phones and can communicate and travel and see each other, like we have such a different relationship. And I love it so much. But like I remember growing up and seeing these people that were like hang out with their cousins all the time, or oh, our family comes over for dinner every Sunday, we're all together. And I'm like, man, that's cool. Like I didn't experience that, but I
yeah,
don't feel like it was a loss from my childhood. It
right.
Our relationship just looked different. It
Yeah.
wasn't good or bad, it was just different.
Mhm.
Um, and I love how you said as long as it wasn't thoughtless, because
Mm,
I think that can go both ways, 'cause I think one of the things she was saying is struggling with the guilt, and
yeah.
at the end of the day, there is no right or wrong decision. Whatever decision you make is the right
Right.
one if you put thought into it.
Yeah.
Then the decision you land on is the right decision,
Mhm.
hands down.
And trust yourself. I think
Mhm,
intuition is real,
mhm,
especially when it comes to parenting.
yep,
It's real. And you know your child better than anyone. I say that to my parents that I work with all the time. You know your child best. Trust your gut.
I'm gonna take that one home when I start. These kids, listen, they're getting to the age. They're getting to the age. I have to trust
I
my
know
gut.
you best.
Yeah.
But I hear that a lot where parents will reflect and they'll say, I just knew something was off. And it's like, not to say that we can read minds as moms or something like that, but it's just like, trust your gut. And then sometimes you're like, I don't know, I just feel like it's going to be okay. And it's like, okay, let's follow that and get more
Mhm.
facts and see where this goes and stay tuned in, right? We're not talking about something simple where it's going to be simple and straightforward. We're talking
Mhm.
about people and relationships which are constantly changing and dynamic. So it's staying tuned in. How are you
Mhm.
feeling? How is your child doing? What does this look like? So I don't know if that's helpful to your friend, but I hope it gives her
Yeah.
some places to go in her mind where maybe she could explore what she wants to do, if anything.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope it was helpful, and I hope anyone else who's listening that has experienced something similar or is going through something similar, that part of that could help them too. So
Yeah.
thank you guys for being here. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Instagram at House of Falls Community. But thank you guys for being here, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks. Bye, guys.